welcome to my Bitcoin story. And today we have special guest Aleks Svetski. So he is the CEO of Ember App and also the host of Wake Up Podcast and did bunch of writing. And this is also the reason why I invite him to the show, because one of his piece, Fiat, Fascism and Communism. So welcome to the show, Aleks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate you inviting me on.
Thank you. You're welcome. Yeah. So I was like reading one of your pieces, Fiat, Fascism and Communism. And I think all the reader needs to also read this article that you made. It was really fascinating to see different effect of fiat money. So before we jump into talking about this piece, I would like you to share the story of your Bitcoin story. So like what was your Bitcoin story? How did you end up getting Bitcoin and went to this Bitcoin rabbit hole?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the short version of the story. Otherwise, we'll use the whole podcast on this story. But I from a young age, I was involved in the stock market, and I lost all of my money. So my plan was to be a millionaire by the time I was 20, and I started off my 20s $250,000 in debt. So I started in the minus, and to get out of that, I became an entrepreneur. I knocked on doors, and alongside that, I questioned, how did I get everything so wrong with the markets? And I started reading about all the craziness that was happening in the marketplace. And I first came across work by people like Mark Faber and Max Kaiser and all that sort of stuff back in the day. And then the original QE started, and I was like an early gold and silver bug. So I was buying a bunch of gold and silver in 2010, 2011, and I made good money out of that. And sort of Bitcoin first came on my radar then, but I didn't take it seriously. I was like, yeah, whatever, internet funny money, I'm not really interested. And I kind of like proceeded with my life. And it was only in 2016 where a friend of mine mentioned Bitcoin again to me. We were sort of at his place hanging out, and he was a bit of an interesting character. And he was telling me about how he had a friend of his that had made all this money on Bitcoin. And I said, is this thing still around? And he's like, yeah, man, it's, everyone's making money. I was like, what the hell? So I started looking into it. And, my initial intention was to also make money. And so I've got a bit of a saying that I tell everyone, which is, I came for the money, but I stayed for the money. And what I mean by that is, I wanted to sort of trade and make money in the beginning, but as I dug deeper, I realized that there was something really fundamentally profound about Bitcoin. And a money that is unable to be co-opted, corrupted, controlled, or issued by any individual or organization has an incredible has the potential to really impact society in a positive way. And the more I dug into this, the more I realized that there's something extraordinarily special here. And yeah, as such, I went further down the proverbial rabbit hole. I've always been an avid reader of many, many things. And it just aligned with my values around personal responsibility, around skin in the game. I've always been a believer of fairness. I don't believe in equality. I think equality is a stupid outcome, but fairness is a very good outcome. And, Bitcoin sort of ticks all these boxes for me. And the more I've hung around, the more I've dug into it, the more I'm incentivized to continue, because it's such a profound thing. So that's my story.
Wow. Yeah, I think everyone always lured by Bitcoin in mostly like by number goes up, right? Because the price goes up, but it actually change the way we think and change us in many different ways. And one of I think the biggest rabbit hole for all Bitcoiner is that the exploration of fiat world. So my question to you, what is fiat meant for you?
The word fiat, I mean, by definition, it means by decree. So it's like a commandment from somebody or something, right? And for me, fiat just means like all that is like for me, fiat, I almost differentiate it between rulers and ruled, or top down versus bottom up, the central versus decentralized. So it's sort of like it represents a mechanism that is divergent to the natural order of things. And the natural order of things is sort of this emergent organic bottom up development. And so when you think about life, life doesn't happen because somebody in the center said this is how it's going to happen. Life happens at the edges, and it emerges, and it creates, it makes mistakes, it adjusts, it does that sort of stuff. So for me, like, a lot of my pieces, and if people take a moment out to read my articles or watch my podcasts or anything like that, I'm always bashing this idea of the state. I'm always saying, look, we don't need a state. The state is the arbiter of, or the creator of fiat, the issuer of fiat. It's the institution of modern slavery and serfdom and all of this. So in my mind, the original manifestation of the state was supposed to be an organization of elected officials who acted to protect private property rights. And in protecting private property rights, people of the society or of the state would be able to coexist in a manner that was more peaceful. So that was the original, attempt, or the incarnation of the state. The problem is, as with all man-made things, there's an opportunity to, get an unfair advantage. So what happened over time is, instead of the state being the protector of property rights, today they're the biggest threat to private property rights. Like, the one entity, the one institution that can actually take everything from you if they want to is actually the state. If they don't like you, like Julian Assange is a great example. Edward Snowden is a great example. Like the countless people out there, like Ross Ulbricht is another great example of someone who was a peaceful guy, created a website for people to buy and sell things voluntarily. And he's serving 2 life sentences in prison. It's absolutely ridiculous. So for me, that kind of stuff happens gradually over time as those elected officials in the state give themselves, or are able to give themselves, what's called legislative power. So instead of being custodians of the what's a good word? Instead of being the custodians of the agency of protection that we've given them, they become the custodians of what law means. So instead of us all following the same set of rules, they start to create a new set of rules and create legislature that gives them some sort of protection, and the rest of us not. And in doing so, step by step, we sort of move towards the creation of a monopoly on money. And the monopoly on money is actually at the core of the power of the state now, because as a institution that is able to issue money, you are able to enrich yourself at the expense of everyone else. What people don't realize is a monetary system, an economy is a closed system. So when you create something on one side, there's a credit on one side of the ledger equals a debit on the other. So the system has to balance out. And by doing that, what we've transformed the state into, or our relationship with the state, has gone from one of elected officials that we pay to protect us to one of, I call it the subject overlord relationship. So we're subjects and the state is the overlord. And they confiscate our money through tax. They spend it on shit that we have no say in. We think we have a say because of democracy. And if we don't like it, we get thrown in jail, or we get taxed more, or we get beaten up, or we get discredited. So it's like, it's a crazy relationship. Whereas in a world where sort of like, on a Bitcoin standard, you actually have, and we'll talk about this later, but you have a customer service provider relationship. And that's how, a small scale state should operate. A small scale government should operate is, we're going to provide you a service, and our service is going to be, we're going to provide policing to help ensure that you don't get robbed or bashed or something like that. So protection of private property, we're going to maybe offer some judicial services and maybe some other services, whatever. And you just pay a fee to come and, have these services, and anything else you want, you can buy a la carte, as and how you want to. Now, that kind of a model is a customer service provider relationship. And the most important thing about that kind of relationship is that you can go somewhere else voluntarily and be a customer elsewhere. But in the current model, there is no incentive for the state, to be honest, because you can't go anywhere else. They own it. If you don't like it, they'll just kill you, or they'll shut you up, or they'll lock you up, or whatever the case is. So it's a really weird relationship, and people sort of find that to be normal, and it's abnormal, and it's completely fueled because the bankrupt system, it's only fueled by their capacity to continue printing money, to continue issuing fiat. So if we rip that out of their hands, they can't stay in business, and they break down, and we move back towards a customer service provider relationship as opposed to a subject overlord relationship.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting because it seems like whenever human try to control things, it's just, the power can be corrupted. Like, I think human is prone to corrupt the power that they have. And that's why, like, because Bitcoin is bound by the natural law, so it's less corruptible than what a system that is made by a human, right? So I mean, this is also what I see right now. There's a lot of young people who's like really pro into socialism, or even in some case communism. And maybe before we jump into socialism, communism, and fascism, would you explain a little bit what is the difference between these three? What is the difference between socialism, communism, and fascism?
They're actually all the same. This is what people, they mix up. They think they're sort of different. They think they're one's left wing, one's right wing, and all this. They're all the same. They're all forms of collectivism, which assert that some imaginary collective is what exists, and that the individuals that make it up don't actually matter. It's like you don't matter, dear. I don't matter. But what matters is this collective. So what's the collective? It's the group. Well, what's the group? It's all of us. Like so there's never an answer to it, right? And the only difference really between the three is just the illusion of the mechanism via which they operate. So communism, illusion there is that, hey, the state manages everything and just hands it all out to everyone. Socialism is kind of like the same sort of version, but kind of allows for some sort of private enterprise to operate, but then just steals from the private enterprise and redistributes to everyone. And fascism is the idea that the government tells private enterprise what to do. But it's all basically the same thing, So sort of the world we live in today is like a blend of all of these things. So it's always some moron set of bureaucrats or dictators who think that they know how to judge everything, that you and I don't know what's best for ourselves, and that we should give our responsibility and our decision-making capacity to these idiots. And it is all of it is absolutely ridiculous, because the only real constituent of society is the individual, and the individual is the one who knows best for themselves. Simple as that. So all of these things fall apart. None of them work. And every single time they've been tried, it's turned into confiscation of private property. It's been a disaster every single time. And all we hear from these young idiots is that, oh, but it wasn't done right, so let's just try it again and kill a bunch of people again. It's so moronic.
And so you think that, you said that socialism, communism, fascism is all about form of collectivism, right? And the state itself, no matter what the country is it like a communist country, or is it like Republican country, all of this is a form of socialism, correct? Like all country is a form of socialism. So do you think there is no real capitalism in this world right now? There's no.
Absolutely not. I have not seen a single form of capitalism since I was born ever in my life. It doesn't exist in this world. Maybe the closest thing possible to it would be somewhere like maybe Monaco, or I mean, but even Monaco is not really, very capitalist anymore. It's like maybe like remnants of Dubai. So here's the thing, like capitalism is just the natural state of human beings. Like what we do as human beings, we're these, advanced monkeys, and we take stuff like from the ground, we take resources, we use our intellect, our energy, and our time, we transform it into something of higher order value, and we decide to exchange that with someone else. That's the process of capitalism. Capitalism is the process of taking scarce resources and transforming it into something of higher order value. And the more efficiently you do that, the more capital you can accumulate. So capitalism is actually the only thing that's good for the environment, because you do less with more. It's the only thing that's good for society, because you're doing less with more again, and you're adding value to people. So it's our natural state. So in some senses, the capitalist force exists in society, and it's always existed since the first time we threw a fucking stick at at a piece of prey that we wanted to. So our action in doing that was to kill the animal and turn the animal into energy and food for the community, or to plant something, for example. That's a form of capitalism, or to turn a rock into a spear or something like that. So all of these things always exist. So the capitalist force will always permeate society. It is a progressive force. But these collectivisms, that exist in and around it, what they do is they try and take the capital that individuals generate and redistribute it to people based on some central authority's notion of what is right and what is wrong. And that's theft by definition. It's like, I know what to do with my resources because I created them. You cannot tell me what to do with my resources. It is fundamentally theft at its most, basic level. Like, if I want protection, I'll pay for protection. If I don't want it, I don't need it. And that's sort of like the voluntary nature of existence has sort of been thrown out the window, and replaced with this forceful attempt for the state to redistribute wealth how they see fit, not in how consenting individuals may want to interact amongst each other.
Yeah. So like back again in collectivism. So like if like in capitalism, it's just taking all of this information from so many individual, right? And then the market will allocate themselves where they see efficiently, where they see fit. Whereas in collectivism, or like whatever the form it is, like it's just reducing the information to just a small group, and that doesn't really represent the whole market. That's what
Absolutely,
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, capitalism is natural. Like, just to add one last piece to this, is like, nature exists because it makes decisions at the edge, and it functions at the edge, not from some central thing, like we said in the beginning. And this is what capitalism does. That the market is a capitalist force. It is human beings, and people sort of think the market is some sort of being that sits here at some sort of organization. It's not. The market is you and me. We are the market, right? So what we're doing right now as a podcast is actually a market. You have a need for somebody to come and talk. I have a need for talking. And we come together and we create a podcast. Like, that is a market in action. And we have found each other because we have streams of communication. So that's the natural order, that's natural law, that's the natural progression of things, is people connecting, things being done, needs being serviced by those who have the capacity to service them, as opposed to it being mandated or dictated by some group who cannot possibly have the same set of information that each individual has at the edge. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm. So talking about, like you mentioned a bit about how state can take property right, and then like someone's property right, and then use it for them. And I also like read on your piece about different effect of fiat money. So like, let's say destruction of environment, or maybe health as well. Like there's so many obesity or depression. A lot of people see this actually is the fault of big corporation, right? People think like, oh, capitalism is bad because this company, they do, illegal fishing. This company like dump all of their waste in the ocean and stuff like that. So do you think the one that make it bad, is it the cronies or the capitalism, like wrong kind of capitalism, or is just that because we are using the wrong money that result on this catastrophe?
Well, the wrong money is the root of it, right? So here's what happens. We talked about capitalism as this force that is one of progression, right? And the incentive mechanism for the capitalist force of progression is profit. Like, profit by definition, if I've earned profit, it means that I've provided you something of value that you've perceived as greater value for you than the money that you had, right? Now, this progressive force, if it's directed in a bad, like in the wrong direction, or if it's built on unsound foundations, like wasteful foundations, it can run rampant. And here's an example I'll use. Let's say we've got a tree, like a forest, and lumber that we need to harvest from the forest, right? So you've got three mechanisms to dictate how the tree should be chopped down and turned into lumber for people to build houses and to use the wood, right? So step one is a completely public method, or a completely collectivist method. And there's no price signals. The central authority decides who should have what, and says, all right, we'll dictate and we'll chop down. We know this doesn't work because it's impossible for them to know who needs wood, and why should they give wood to someone who doesn't need it versus someone who's trying to build a house that doesn't. It just doesn't work. So we know that doesn't work. On the other hand, and maybe instead of giving the two, I'll take the examples instead. The second version is a mixture of public and private, right? So it is the idea that we, the government or the state, we own this public land, we own this forest. And what we're going to do is we're going to issue some private organization a license to chop the trees, because this private organization is in touch with customers who have a real need. So they actually can figure out the pricing model, and they can decide how much they should chop and how much they should price it at. So it's more efficient. That's what they say. But what happens is the incentive system is messed up. So the government will say, all right, here's a 10-year license on chopping some trees down here. The license holder, the private entity, has every incentive to increase their cash flow and not respect the capital that exists in the forest. So their incentive is, well, shit, we've got this license for a short period of time. Let's just chop down everything because we need as much of these trees as possible. Because once this license expires, well, then, we need to go and capitalize on something else. So they'll chop absolutely fucking everything down. And then they'll load up their capital stock because they'll want to maximize cash flow. And the public entity that owns the forest, they've sold the license. They've already made the money. They don't give a shit. They don't have any skin in the game. So it doesn't matter to them unless they've got some internal, environmentalists that try and, rail against it. But fundamentally, the incentives are wrong. Now, the third option is a completely private version. And a fully private version is where the private company actually owns the forest. And the private company then is in touch with the marketplace, can decipher the pricing signals, information from the market as to who wants what. But more importantly, the private company actually owns the capital stock. It owns the forest, and it is not going to be dumb enough to chop all of its fucking trees down, because then it has no long-term business. So it is incentivized to actually look after the resource, to grow more trees, to be careful about when it chops and how it chops and all this sort of stuff. And this is why private property is actually at the center of all environmental development and everything. So we live in sort of the more middle world, which is not complete, central planning, but it's somewhere in the middle, which is the public system or the nation state doesn't care about its resources. So it partners with these so-called private corporations, And it absolutely rapes and pillages all of our resources, whether on land, whether in the ocean, whether everything, because there is no incentive. These public corporations, these private corporations don't own anything, and they can rip it all up in the process of trying to generate cash flow as opposed to protecting the capital itself. And this is a problem of not having skin in the game. And that's where, like, you know, when people talk about this as, you know, this is capitalism, that's not capitalism. We're not preserving the capital. We're raping it. We're using it all up. That is not a form of capitalism. So that's an example I try and use with people when I explain, like, you know, what's happening with these corporations. Like, and I'll sort of add one more thing here, is that these corporations are fundamentally they're an arm of the state, right? Like, at this point in time, if you're close enough to the monetary spigot, so in other words, if you're close enough to the money printer, if you're close enough to the issuance of money, you get advantages that the rest of the world doesn't get. So, like, if you're a publicly listed company now, all the money that's being printed, all the, you know, quantitative easing and all this stuff that's happening, it filters through into the banking sector first. You know, the banking sector then has to allocate that capital and deploy it somewhere. Where do you think it goes? It goes into public markets. So these companies that are already big, they get even more money. And with even more money, they can make more moves that waste and burn resources because they don't care. The government's going to print more and they're going to do more. Like this. So they have this sort of never-ending tap. So it doesn't matter what they do. They can burn up resources because there's no real cost to them doing that. And what people don't understand is money represents resources. So when you're just wasting money, you're actually wasting resources. So we have to turn that fiat tap off. Like, if we don't turn the fiat tap off, we're going to absolutely devastate and destroy the environment, because these guys have a license to do whatever the fuck they want to do. They can burn through all the resources because they're just going to keep getting money in from the state, from the government. Mm-hmm. And that's what, you know, that's what's destroying the world at the moment.
So you think this, if we, let's say, in the future, we change into a Bitcoin standard instead of fiat standard. So you think this whole problem with what people see as the problem of capitalism, which is right now is actually, it's a capitalism / socialism mixed together. Do you think that will solve the problem with when the Bitcoin
100%? Yeah, because see, they can't exist. Like, so a company that does damage, for example, you stop buying from them, mm-hmm. and they start going bankrupt. So they have to think about what to do in a better way, right? So today, like, if you're a DuPont, for example, a chemical company or whatever, you can do whatever the hell you want. You can poison everyone, and then you just get a bailout from the government. It's like, what the hell? So it's like they can go and make all the mistakes they want, and it's like a game of heads they win, tails we lose. Whereas if you remove that, they don't have the same capacity. Now, that doesn't mean, like, I'm not talking about some utopia where there's no mistakes that ever get made, right? So mistakes will still happen. You still have bad actors, but the beauty is that the bad actors cannot remain bad for extended periods of time. We can bankrupt them. Like, so a great example is, we've seen in the last 10 years, particularly, the rise of, like, lots of, you know, these sort of health food stores and organic farming and all this sort of stuff, right? That's a capitalist drive. That is people seeking out better product services. And if it was up to us, we would all be buying from there because there's a better quality of product, you know, buying local, buying from farmers, you know, and all this sort of stuff. But the big chains, they get to stay in business because they're listed on the stock exchange. They can get debt from the government basically for free. They can finance themselves and still sell superior junk. And they can do it. They can undercut all of the honest farmers, the honest shops, so when they can't do that, their costs will rise. People stop buying their junk. We go somewhere else, and they go bankrupt. So then the incentive actually goes towards. So we actually realign the natural capitalist incentive towards producing something of better value, instead of using the government fiat machine to create cheaper garbage and cheaper junk that nobody fucking needs in the first place, and polluting the world and polluting people's health and wasting resources and all this sort of stuff. So fiat's really a fucking poison to the earth. So yeah, so I definitely think Bitcoin fixes this, like in the most profound of ways.
Mm. Because again, it's back to the fact that Bitcoin is like it's work based on natural law instead of the law that is man-made that probably has I mean most what human trying to do with power it's just want to make itself more powerful, so it's more like incentivize the government to expand their power, whereas like in Bitcoin it's just as a natural law, like it will follow the natural
Well,
law.
it follows natural. That doesn't mean that people will not try and compound power. And I actually don't believe there's not anything wrong with that. So I, as a Bitcoiner, for example, I'm going to continue in the future to keep trying to build wealth, to get more Bitcoin, to build more industry, to add more value to the world. And I want to increase my personal power, my personal choice. Like I'm still going to do that. The difference here is that I cannot do that at your expense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's the really important thing, is that it doesn't mean that we somehow solve this desire for human beings to want to amass power. We can, and we should, and we should continue to progress. Now, some of the people out there will be bad actors, so there is going to be assholes, there is going to be this and that, but because the system is structured such that if you make bad decisions or if you're a consistent asshole, you will fall down the ladder, because you can't keep yourself there artificially. Like at the moment, you can stay there artificially, because if you make a bad mistake, or if you're a bad actor, like a bad government or a bad central banker and shit. I mean, Christine Lagarde is a perfect example. She got charged with, like, stealing or embezzling $400 million, and now she got promoted to the fucking head of the central bank. Like, so in that world, the more wrong you do, the more reward. What the fuck is going on here? So it's, when we remove that, it creates incentive disincentives that are aligned with, like you said, the natural order of things.
Mm. And everyone's who right now looking at the news, they see that fiat days are numbered because of the amount of billions of dollars that got printed in the US or Canada, or a lot of country also printed a lot of money. So like, how long do you think it will last, this thing, and what would you see the future is going to like, because US dollar is pretty much the center of all of currency at the moment. So I mean, we cannot predict the future, but at least what do you think what will happen basically?
They're going to continue to deny reality as long as they can, basically, because the alternative is that they stop fiscal and monetary stimulus, that they raise rates, for example, and then that tanks all the assets. But the problem is all the asset holders don't want that to happen, so they're going to lobby for the reverse, which is do not do that. Keep stimulating, keep doing this and that. So it's basically, they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. The system is broken either way. So I guess in terms of timing, the one thing the US dollar has going for it is, it's held by so many people in so many countries and so many treasuries, and because it is the currency that everything's technically measured in around the world, it's got everyone's skin is a little bit in the game there, right? Like, so it's kind of like this thing's falling off a cliff, but it's kind of got like chains that are sort of scraping on the cliff and like holding it, or it's like Icarus with the wax wings, sort of flying towards the sun. Like, this is sort of where the Bitcoin Citadel meme really emerges. It's a real thing. Like, Bitcoiners need to create these communities, firstly virtual, then in person, of people, contacts, networks, and all this sort of stuff, and then kind of one day turn that into small communities and cities. Like, I actually think the second half of this decade, and probably the first half of the next decade, is going to be the rise of private cities, where smaller nation states like Eastern Europe, or Southeast Asia or Central America and stuff, like nation states that are going to go bankrupt because they don't have the US dollar. Like it's not their currency, so they don't have that sort of the fact that everyone holds their currency as a bit of support. So they're all going to be screwed. They're not going to have any way. Like the wealth has been drained from their societies. They're going to have to make deals with enterprising individuals to either sell off their land or lease off their land, in order for people like me and other Bitcoiners to come together and say, look, you're an idiot. You can't run your country properly. Everyone's starving. We're going to take this area and we'll pay you a small fee on an annual basis for this area, but we're going to build our own private city. We've got our own protection, our own laws. Fuck you. And I think that's really going to start. And if we can develop some sort of franchise model for that and start bringing it around the world, I think we'll see the rise of private cities and the fall of the traditional nation state. And that is all going to be driven by the emergence of Bitcoin being the hardest money in the world that everyone wants to hold. And if you're a Bitcoiner today, like, you have the capacity to help build this future. So coming back to your original question, I think this decade's going to be the real change. I think, we're going to see the transformation this decade. And I think next decade is going to be the decade where we build an nation. And the decade after that is going to be one of, I think, real, flourishing prosperity. So that's sort of how I see the timelines.
Hmm. And talking about citadel and private cities, so what is your proposal for a better governance, like just to make sure that whatever the governments right now that doing, we are not repeating the same thing, or will Bitcoin will just be using Bitcoin will immediately change everything, change the way we govern ourselves?
So I think a model for a future society is one of a membership. So think of like the hotel or the resort model, right? You go to a resort and everything is sort of provided and you pay like a fee. You have, things are secure, you've got food, you've got everything sort of covered, and you sort of got your base things. And then you can go and, on a boat if you want, you pay extra for that. So you sort of pay for the things you need. So I think in a future private city, like if I was to build Svetski City, I would say, all right, there's no tax here. It's all open. Anyone can come and build whatever they want. But to come here and to live here, there's a minimum membership fee. So maybe what we'll do is we'll provide say 2 or 3 different policing options that choose as sort of the private protection. We may offer some insurance for healthcare if people want to buy that insurance, or they can just pay for it individually, if and when they want. But like this sort of idea of a membership model where you sort of pay for the basics, and in the city we sort of provide these basics, and this is what it costs to live here. As the membership. If you don't like it, you can leave, no problem. If you do like it, you can stay. And then in that city, you buy and use whatever you want. So education is up to you. Transport is up to you. Everything is up to you. You decide and pay for what you want, and you voluntarily pay for living in the city. Now, as the owner of the city, because it'll be a private one, we'll have our own call it police force or a little mini army or militia or whatever. Which is, if you're an asshole and you just pay for it, we'll just grab you and throw you out of the city. So it's not like we won't throw you in a jail because we don't need jails. We'll just get you out. So I think all of that kind of stuff transforms. And, but Bitcoin is at the core of that, because in today's day and age, taxation happens involuntarily. So if I'm the government and you're the taxpayer, I take it from you and you can't say shit. Whereas in a Bitcoin world, me as the governor, I can't take your Bitcoin. You have to voluntarily choose to pay it. So I have to provide a really good service in order for you to stay. And, we have a clear contractual arrangement, and a contractual arrangement can be done via a multi-sig wallet or something like that. It can be done on Bitcoin.
Yeah, that sounds really a cool governance. I have to say, like you just opt in and opt out if you want to, like a membership. Yeah, that's really cool. But we will see. I think we will see in the future what's gonna be, and I think we are still early in this transition And I think it's very beautiful that we have an option right now for everyone in case something happened to their country, like because of the wrong things that the government decide for the fiat money. Then everyone actually right now have different option, which is Bitcoin. I think it's very beautiful.
Like I think Bitcoin's the most optimistic thing in the world today. Without it, I just don't know what people are thinking. Like, I don't know how you could be optimistic about the world without Bitcoin. Like, I actually, I feel sorry for anyone who hasn't taken the orange pill or hasn't gone down the rabbit hole. Yeah, Bitcoin really is hope.
Mm-hmm. So I think we are at the end of our podcast. So maybe Alex, if people, you have any last thing that you want to say, or like how can people find you? Maybe you can share it to the audience.
Cool. So 3 ways people can find me is on my Twitter. That's sort of where I am most of the time, and it's be aware it's my more aggressive alter ego where I'm always bashing someone or calling out some sort of stupidity. So that's at Aleks Svetski, Aleks Svetski. So that's sort of one area. If you want the more thought through version of me, where I sort of think about things deeper and discuss them, that's my Medium, my blog, and that's just svetsky.medium.com. And you'll find the piece that we discussed today. I'm also writing a series on Bitcoin through the Jordan Peterson lens. So I'm taking his 12 rules for life and then turning that into a series of 12 essays looking at Bitcoin through each of his lessons. I'd also recommend in there's a piece called Utopian Dystopias, which was part of the Bitcoin Times edition 3. And a year before that, I wrote Rise of the Individual, Fall of the State, which sort of discusses how the world's transforming with the rise of Bitcoin and sort of moving into the sort of sovereign individual thesis. And then sort of the third thing is anchor.fm, which is where I host my podcast. So the Wake Up podcast, and I've had some pretty cool guests on there. I think the most popular show to date still is the one with Gigi and Breedlove, where it was called The Cosmic Call. I think it's episode 16, and we just sort of rambled on for 3 hours, but it's a really good discussion. And we've got to still do Cosmic Call Part 2. And then if you're in Australia, I sort of my entrepreneurial manifestation of the passion that is Bitcoin for me is my app called Amber, and we've sort of developed this over the last couple of years. And it allows us to set and forget a Bitcoin savings plan, basically. So turn your garbage fiat that's destroying the planet, that is creating poverty, that is destroying education, that is destroying the health. You take that crap, that junk that is fiat, and you transform it into Bitcoin, which is something that is good for the environment, good for your health, good for social mobility, good for society, and good for humanity. So, that's... If you're in Australia, check it out. It's just the amber.app. But yeah, most of my stuff is in the other column. So I really appreciate you having me on, and I really hope that people got some value out of this.
Oh, I'm absolutely. And thank you so much for your time and then like your knowledge, and keep writing. I really enjoy your Twitter as well. Alex raging, but yeah, but cool. Okay.
That's me.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Alex, and I hope you have a wonderful day today.
Thank you so much, dear. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the My Bitcoin Story. Stay tuned for more episodes and click that follow button.